Who are the Ainu, and why has their origin confused scientists for over a century? When Western explorers first encountered them in the 19th century, they could not make sense of what they were seeing. The Ainu were unlike the Japanese in almost every visible way. Thick beards, deep-set eyes, abundant body hair, lighter skin. The observers concluded, with the confident wrongness of their era, that the Ainu must be Europeans, a lost island of Caucasoids stranded somehow in the middle of the Pacific world. Some researchers spent decades trying to prove a connection to prehistoric Europe. Others called the Ainu the most mysterious people on Earth. The DNA tells a completely different story. The Ainu are not Europeans, but they are also not simply Japanese. And the truth of what they actually are is far older and far stranger than either assumption ever came close to capturing. Ancient genome studies have now extracted genetic evidence from remains across the Japanese archipelago and its surrounding regions, allowing researchers to compare populations separated by thousands of years. What they found has overturned a long-accepted model, opened new questions, and placed the Ainu in a genetic category so distinct that describing it requires going back to the edge of the last ice age. To understand the Ainu, you have to start with geography, because the land shaped everything. Before we start, what part of the world are you in? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe. Hokkaido is the northernmost major island of Japan, but calling it an island is slightly misleading when it comes to human movement. To its northwest lies Sakhalin, a long finger of land stretching down from the Russian Far East. To its northeast, the Kuril Islands arc outward like a broken bridge toward the Kamchatka Peninsula and the coast of Siberia. The Sea of Okhotsk sits between them all. For most of human history, these were not distant foreign shores. They were corridors. People, animals, languages, and cultures moved along this arc constantly. The Ainu historically occupied not just Hokkaido, but Sakhalin and parts of the Kurils as well, a territory that stretched across one of the world's great maritime crossroads, where the Pacific Ocean, the Arctic world, and the East Asian continent all pressed against each other. That position is not a coincidence. It is the key to everything. Today, the Ainu are officially recognized as indigenous to Japan, a recognition that only came in 2019. Their population was dramatically reduced over centuries by forced assimilation policies, displacement, and the suppression of their language and culture. But the question of where they came from reaches back far deeper than any policy or border. It reaches back to the very first people who walked onto the Japanese archipelago. Before going further, it is worth separating out what the word Ainu actually describes, because nationality, language, culture, ethnicity, and DNA are not the same thing, and confusing them has caused problems for over a century. The Ainu have a distinct identity built from a specific language, a bear ceremony tradition, an animist cosmology, and an oral epic tradition. These are culturally specific and irreducible, but the genetic story beneath that identity is not one thing. It is several things layered on top of each other across thousands of years. When people ask where the Ainu come from, they often expect one answer. The DNA gives them three, and the three are genuinely surprising. The oldest layer is the Jomon. The Jomon people occupied the Japanese archipelago for more than 14,000 years. Ancient DNA studies, including research published in journals such as Nature's Communications Biology, indicate that the Jomon were likely descended from Upper Paleolithic people who reached the islands and became largely isolated during and after the last glacial maximum, the period when ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere and sea levels were far lower than today. In those conditions, Japan was not an island chain in the modern sense. It was connected to parts of the continent in ways that are now submerged. People moved there and then, over millennia, stayed. The Jomon are remarkable for several reasons. They were hunter-gatherers and fishers who produced some of the oldest pottery in the world, with sites dating back to roughly 16,500 years BCE. Genetically, research describes them as representing a deep branch of East Asian diversity, meaning they are neither closely related to mainstream East Asian populations, as we know them today, nor connected to West Eurasian or European populations. They are something older and more independent, a lineage that diverged early and then spent an extraordinary amount of time in relative isolation. But even the Jomon were not one uniform people. This is where the story begins to deepen. Ancient DNA analysis of Jomon, remains from different parts of the archipelago, has revealed a striking internal split. Eastern Jomon populations, centered in places like Hokkaido and the Kanto region, show a dominance of one maternal haplogroup. Western Jomon populations show a different one. A haplogroup, to be clear, is a marker of a single maternal or paternal ancestral line. It is not the identity of a whole people, but it does reveal patterns of movement and separation. The fact that Eastern and Western Jomon populations show different patterns suggests that even during the Jomon period, the archipelago was not genetically homogeneous. There was already internal diversity across thousands of years of relative isolation. The Ainu are most closely descended from the Hokkaido Jomon specifically. Research suggests that the majority of modern Ainu ancestry traces back to this northern branch of the Jomon world. But the majority is not everything, and this is where the second layer enters. Around 900 to 1400 years ago, something changed in northern Hokkaido. The Okhotsk culture arrived. This was not a vague cultural influence. It was a structured, archaeologically traceable movement of people southward from the Sea of Okhotsk region, from Sakhalin, the Kuril Islands, and the coastal Russian Far East. The Okhotsk people were skilled maritime hunters with cultural and genetic ties to the northeast Siberian world. Their closest living genetic relatives appear to be the Nivk and Koryak peoples of Siberia. When the Okhotsk culture expanded into northern Hokkaido, it did not simply leave pottery styles or burial traditions behind. It left ancestry, a 2018 study analyzing mitochondrial DNA from Hokkaido. Ainu individuals dating to the Edo period found that Okhotsk-type haplogroup frequencies in the Ainu population were comparable in scale to Jomon-type haplogroups. In plain terms, the Siberian contribution to the formation of the Ainu was not a footnote, it was one of the main pillars. This was a collision of two worlds, the ancient Jomon world of the island and the Siberian maritime world of the north, and the Ainu emerged from the meeting point. But the way the mixing happened is one of the most striking findings in this entire story. Genetic evidence suggests the Okhotsk contribution entered the Ainu population primarily through the maternal line. Mitochondrial DNA, which passes through mothers, shows heavy Okhotsk-derived haplogroup frequencies among the Ainu. But the Y chromosome, which passes through fathers, tells a different story. Ainu men carry haplogroup D1b at very high frequencies, and this haplogroup is found almost exclusively within the Japanese archipelago. It is a deep Jomon signature. What this means is that the paternal lineages of the Ainu track back predominantly to ancient Jomon men, while a large portion of the maternal lineages carry Siberian ancestry from the Okhotsk period. Researchers suggest this asymmetry may reflect specific patterns of social and cultural mixing between the incoming Okhotsk groups and the Jomon-descended Hokkaido residents. It was not a simple replacement. It was something more structured and more human, two populations meeting along a coastline, over generations, in ways that left a distinct and readable imprint. And then there is the language. The Ainu language is a complete isolate. It has no demonstrated connection to any other language family on Earth. It is not related to Japanese. It is not related to Korean. It bears no proven relationship to any Siberian language family, any Austronesian branch, or any other language spoken today or in the historical record. A language isolate, in linguistic terms, means the last surviving member of a lineage that stretches back into prehistory without known relatives. Phylogeographic analysis, a method that tracks how language varieties spread across space and time, dates the spread of the Proto-Ainu language across Hokkaido to roughly 1,300 years ago, originating in the north of the island. That timing overlaps closely with the Okhotsk culture period. Whether the language emerged from the contact between Jomon and Okhotsk populations, or whether it carries an even older heritage partially transformed by that contact, is still being investigated. What is certain is that the Ainu language carries no simple key to geographic origin. It is, in a real sense, a voice from a world that no longer exists anywhere else. The third layer of Ainu ancestry comes from the south. The Satsumon culture, associated with migrations from mainland Honshu, brought ancestry derived from the Yayoi people northward into Hokkaido over time. The Yayoi were the rice-farming migrants who arrived in the Japanese archipelago from the Korean peninsula roughly 3,000 years ago, and gradually transformed the genetic and cultural landscape of mainland Japan. Their arrival and expansion are why modern mainland Japanese carry substantially less Jomon ancestry than the Ainu do. In southwestern Hokkaido, closer to the Honshu border, research indicates that Ainu individuals show higher levels of this mainland-derived ancestry. The Yayoi layer is the most recent and genetically the least dominant in the Ainu population, but it was not absent, and it shaped the political and demographic pressures the Ainu would face across centuries. The genetics of the Ainu are not uniform across their former territory. This is important. Southwestern Hokkaido, adjacent to mainland Japan, shows the clearest mainland influence. Northern and eastern Hokkaido, along with the Kuril Islands and Sakhalin, retain stronger profiles blending the Jomon and Okhotsk contributions. Research indicates that Ainu from the Sakhalin region historically showed closer genetic affinities with the Nivach people than with Ainu in southern Hokkaido. The Ainu world was internally varied, shaped by the same geographic forces that shaped it from the beginning: closeness to the sea, distance from the south, the specific corridors of contact available at any given time. The modern border between Japan and Russia, which passes through Sakhalin and cuts across the Kuril chain, divides what was once a continuous zone of related peoples. The genetics ignore that border. They describe a world that existed before either nation was imagined. And this brings us back to the European question, because it deserves a direct answer. Why do some Ainu individuals appear, to certain observers, to resemble Europeans? The answer involves something genuinely unexpected. Research published in the Journal of Human Genetics found that the Ainu carry certain gene variants associated with facial features more commonly found among West Eurasian populations than among typical East Asian groups. But this does not indicate European ancestry. What it more likely reflects is the retention of an ancient Paleolithic genomic signature, one that predates the divergence of modern East Asian and European populations from their shared deep ancestors. In other words, the Jomon lineage is old enough that it still carries traces of a shared ancestral base that later gave rise to very different populations around the world. The Ainu do not look European because they are connected to Europe in any recent sense. They look the way they look because the Jomon line was ancient enough to have never fully adopted the more recent East Asian morphological patterns that reshaped most of the continent over the last several thousand years. They are not Caucasoids. They are something older, carrying a Paleolithic signal that most other populations have since obscured under later migrations. The old dual-structure model of Japanese prehistory, which dominated scholarship for decades, argued that the Ainu were essentially frozen Jomon, while mainland Japanese were mainly Yayoi. It was a tidy division. Ancient DNA has shown that it was only partly right. The Ainu are deeply Jomon in their ancestry, yes, but they are not simply Jomon. The Okhotsk contribution was real and substantial. The language diverged in the north, under specific conditions, around 1,300 years ago. The Ainu were not untouched. They were changed, and what they became was something distinct from anything before or around them. A person with a language no one else speaks. A genome that sits outside the main categories of East Asian ancestry. A physical appearance that confused Western observers for over a century. The Ainu are not mysterious because scientists failed to study them carefully enough. They are mysterious because they are genuinely, specifically old. Old in a way that the usual frameworks were never built to describe. What the DNA reveals, across all its layers, is a story of place. Hokkaido and its surrounding arc of islands sits at the edge of the Pacific world, where the coldest Siberian currents meet the oldest human lineages of the Japanese archipelago. 3 streams of people converged there across thousands of years. The Jomon, who had held that land since the Ice Age. The Okhotsk, who brought the Siberian north southward along the island chains. And eventually the Satsumon and later mainland influences, which brought the pressure of a larger expanding world. The Ainu identity that emerged from those convergences is culturally specific, linguistically unique, and rooted in a particular land and way of living. But the genetic record beneath it stretches backward to Ice Age Japan, to Siberian shores, to a Paleolithic human radiation that once ran across the entire northern rim of the world. They are not lost Europeans. They are not simply the last pure Japanese. They are something rarer than either of those things. A people carrying an ancestry so ancient and so layered that it connects, in ways still being mapped and understood, to the very earliest chapters of the human story in the far north of this world. The categories were always too small. The real story was always larger.